Welcome to Navigating the New Normal, Episode 6, Safeguarding Digital Footprints. My name is Krystle Pearson, and I'm your host for today's webinar. I know that teachers are hitting the doors for summer vacation and tech directors are preparing for device inventory, but I am excited to have my special guest, Eileen Belastock, here with me today, former CTO, and she is going to share a little bit about safeguarding digital footprints, what that looks like for tech directors as well as students and online safety. So I can't believe that she's here, you guys. So we're going to go on to our next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that means for educators. So, Kajeet, who are we? We are a company and we believe in digital equity and that students should be able to learn no matter where they choose to study. This rings true no matter what topic we're discussing on our webinars, because I truly believe that whether the students at grandma's house or they're on the go or they're on these summer family vacations, they should have access to be able to learn on the go. Next slide, please. So here we have Eileen.
Hey.
Listen, so I have to share that Eileen, I met her through a mutual colleague here at Kajeet, and we had corresponded, but we didn't really get a chance to meet, as they say, in real life until the Pearson conference this year. So I'm excited to have her here. She's a former K-12 CTO and the CEO of Belastock Consulting. I'm going to read a little bit about her bio. And then we'll talk a little bit. In her role, she serves as an EdTech strategist who understands and promotes critical relationships between technology and education. As I said, as a former CTO for K-12, she has championed safety and security, encouraged student agency, and supported educators in their work to provide students with equitable access to their education. That just right there, that equitable access, that's what it's all about. Eileen is on multiple Pearson committees, including the Pearson Policy and Certification Governance Committee. In addition, for the last 4 years, she has been a thought leader for the Pearson Early Career CTO Academy. As a published author, Eileen enjoys writing about educational technology, educational leadership, data privacy, and cybersecurity, in which most of her publications have been published in EdTech Digest, EdTech K-12, eSchool News, and Education Next. In addition, she serves as a national presenter, media contributor, and on the advisory boards, including Tech and Learning and EdWebNet. Due to her working involvement with state and national EdTech organizations, Eileen was the, wait for it, 2020 Top 100 EdTech Influencer and the 2022 EdTech Digest Leadership Award finalist. I mean, she is just like, she's all things EdTech. I love it. Eileen, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Wow, I'm tired just listening to that. And to add to that, I'm recently working with the Office of EdTech in Massachusetts. It's a fairly new department, and I get to work in the K-12 space at the state level. So I'm really excited about that. Someone said to me is you got almost have the EGOT of education, with being classroom, building principal, district office, and now at the state level. So I'm really excited to continue doing this work even after I've left the physical K-12 setting. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this topic. So let's get to it.
They say that you can take the teacher out of the classroom, but you can never take the classroom out of the teacher. So I'm excited to hear that you are back in that role and you're providing support for those individuals. So we're going to go on and head over to our first slide of today's presentation. And we're going to talk about digital footprints and what does that look like. So let's talk a little bit about what digital footprints are and how do they impact student use and the availability of digital resources. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, with the influx of devices and technology into school districts, we're finding that students have become very vulnerable with the amount of data that is being shared about them. I mean, prior to technology, we didn't share a lot of information that is currently being shared from in some cases, their nationality, their address, their age, a lot of things that we never have the opportunity to share, and it's really concerning to us, because when I talk to a group of teachers, I'll say basically we are determining the financial implications of our young students when they go off and try and get a credit card or rent an apartment, because their digital footprint is so large. In some cases, it's being used for very unlawful opportunities. And how it impacts student use is we're really careful about making sure we're not actually just allowing free apps and free software out there. We've really kind of tightened down on the availability of apps in our district for that reason, just because we want to lessen the digital footprint of our student. I mean, us as adults, it's like my whole life is out on the internet, and I'm sure most of us can say that, but it's not my decision or a teacher's decision to share that information about our students. And that's where we have a big concern right now. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. As a former CTO, I used to do a training on digital footprints. And one of the things I would always tell the students is when I did it, I would say, do you know what a digital footprint is? And they're like, no, what is that? And we talked a little bit about passive digital footprints and how, you leave a trail of data online unbeknownst to you sometimes just from connecting to different Wi-Fi's and surfing different websites, and how that becomes a part of your footprint. And, I told them, I was like, it's almost like when you walk in the sand and you're on the beach and you're enjoying the moment and you feel the breeze and you feel the wind and you're taking in the elements and you're just walking and you don't realize that if you don't look behind, you're leaving a footprint, you're leaving a trail. So sometimes you can get caught up in the excitement of online practices and the resources and the open availability to those things, not realizing that just clicking on certain websites, downloading certain images, all of that leaves a digital footprint. And, the impact on the availability of resources, I just think it is so important that we educate our parents as well as our students through transparency and communication on what that looks like. You see a lot of individuals that they move on to have their careers, and, one of the first things they ask is your social media background, or they'll ask you for your Twitter handle, because your digital footprint is so important to kind of monitor that and manage that. And I love what you said about the apps, because as tech leaders, as well as classroom teachers, it's always good to have a very defined vetting process on applications. They look good and they feel good, and they may be in correspondence or in correlation with whatever the application is or whatever the standard is. But on the security part of that, what information is going to be left out for vulnerability when it pertains to student usage? So it's definitely important to kind of think about that.
And it's even more important right now with the rush of AI into our, not only our homes, but now into our classrooms. And I'm just going to give a quick shout out to Raina Freeman. She's a 5th grade teacher in Mansfield, and her students were using a Google Home in the classroom. This was way before and she knew the implications of voice recognition, name recognition, those kind of things when using a particular tool like that. And her students would go home and turn their family, smart device off, because they understood the implications of that digital footprint that's being created, because the AI is collecting data that we're not always aware of. So.
Yes, absolutely. And even, just the impact of the resources and the availability. Sometimes if there isn't a clear line of communication as to what digital footprints are, sometimes students and staff will be a little reluctant to use the technologies because they don't know how much of their information is being monitored, what's being shared. So it is very important to make sure that they understand what that looks like and how that trail could work for them.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to our next question. All right. This one here, Eileen, is one of my favorite topics to discuss. How
Okay.
can districts continue to give students and staff access to technology resources while keeping users safe online? So I want you to put on your former CTO hat for this
Okay.
and think a little bit about even as a classroom teacher, because students are given an influx of devices, and as the classroom teacher, you're the gatekeeper. You have to manage the device use within the classroom, but then you have your CTOs and your network technicians that are managing it from the security standpoint. How do you feel that districts can continue to give access to those resources?
There's a couple of ways. One of them, and I have to do a shout out to Kajeet on this, was when we were giving out hotspots. Kajeet was has a dashboard where it allows us to turn off certain apps, turn off access to the internet during certain times of the day, like from 11 o'clock to 6 a.m. in the morning. Not allow for social media or streaming. And that was a lifesaver for us during the pandemic when we were handing out so many hotspots just for that connectivity. Currently, I think, and this is where we go back to teachers buying licenses or buildings buying licenses to technology resources without having that conversation at the district level. When I have my CTO hat, I always talk about, does it have a dashboard? Do we have complete access? Can we control the amount of data that's being shared? Can we control who has access? Is there single sign-on options? Can we roster it? You know, all those questions, and CTOs have a checklist of it. And so I think in order for that to happen, it has to be a lot of conversations and communication with classroom teachers and building administrators and district administrators to understand the importance of not locking down things, but making them a much more secure environment for our students. And only work with apps that have signed the student data privacy agreement, and not rely on their privacy policies as a check off for what we can, that it's safe for our students. So I also think it's important that education of our staff and students, as well as our parents, are really important. Having them understand what it means to what it means to click wrap an agreement or to share information online, either through social media or through an ed tech app, through an email, those kind of things. So so not only having strong district policies and procedures, having great communication with all stakeholders, and educating everybody, all these stakeholders, as to how they can keep themselves safe.
Something that I hear from a lot of CTOs is trying to decide who really needs to be at the table when they're developing these plans, whether it's their internal tech plan, because you mentioned stakeholders, but who do you really need at the table to understand that while we want to give access to our students, we still have to remember to keep them safe online. So that is very important. Let's talk a little bit about something that's very near and dear to me. And I think because most times we don't understand the importance of having it until you have a disaster of some sort. But device or district contingency plans and the importance of that. And what does that look like? How do you feel districts can benefit from having those type of resources within their level of in their RAM?
Can you explain more what contingency plan means on that?
Well, like how can districts have plans of support in the event that they have, any type of disaster or any type
Yep. So every district usually has a crisis response plan. If there's a medical emergency, a fire, and an intruder, those kind of things. But so we also, most districts are now either have or are creating a data protection plan, which talks about what can you do pre-attack or data breach, and then what do you do during the attack, and then the mitigation, what do you do after the attack? And so you have to bring all those stakeholders to the table. You bring your superintendent, you bring your, you bring your guidance counselors, you bring your building principals, you bring some teachers in, you bring in your director of curriculum instruction. A lot of districts now I'm seeing actually have a chief security officer as well. And also your lawyers. You need to have them at the table. And if you have any kind of PR department in your district, that's another department. So it's a pretty good group, but it's really important to have that plan in place. For instance, you have to shut off the internet. How do you do payroll? When can we get classes back in the building? How do we not use technology while everything is offline, since we've gotten so used to it? How do we communicate with the families? And I said payroll is a big one. Always have an offsite option for payroll, because a lot of times if your payroll or your finance department are hit, they're gathering Social Security numbers and dates of birth and so much information on not only our staff, but our students and their families as well. So
yeah, I can recall I was working with a district at one point, and just kind of talking with a colleague that worked in that district, and they experienced a situation where a contingency plan would have been perfect. And they were, trying to figure out things all the way down to printed rosters. They didn't have printed rosters. So it was hard to know which kid rode which bus and which student needed to go where. And it really, once you remove the technology, the daily operations were very limited. So just thinking about what that looks like, if it's a printed copy of those things, or you keep photocopies of those items. So I do think it's very important for districts to have those.
Yeah, and part of it, besides the monetary reasons for these attacks happening, is also disruption of school. And so if there's a way for you to continue with the daily operations without technology, they've kind of lost their hold on what they were trying to do. So and in some cases it's students who just don't want to take that Massachusetts, take their MCAS test. Decide to flood the system with emails, and all of a sudden we got to shut the system down, and
Right.
they're thinking yay. But fire drills, we always had paper copies of homerooms. So we need to think big on that when we're talking not only about fire drills or fire emergencies, but also about technology emergencies as well.
Mm-hmm. A good rule of thumb is if you have a school crisis plan, you should always have a contingency plan for your technology, because
Absolutely.
one could be a school crisis, but the other one can also be a school crisis. So that's
in this day and age, it not only affects your security, it affects your HVAC system. It affects so many things have technology embedded in it and sometimes it takes until something happens for people to really understand it. But what I'm seeing is there's a lot of communication among CTOs across the country, and organizations like ISTE and COSIN especially are really doing a lot of work around that, just educating people and learning from each other. And in my writing, I do a lot of that. I highlight the steps that they took. They may not have been perfect, but they learned from it, and I'm hoping that the readers also learn from it.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our next slide.
Okay.
All right. How can the implementation of network security measures help districts to safeguard digital footprints for students and staff?
Okay, so besides having a strong infrastructure, having firewalls are really critical. Having activity detection programs, whether it's in-house or out-of-house, to make sure that what the traffic is that's coming in and out. To make sure that, for instance, we had a lot of activity a couple of years ago from Russia and China, and we actually shut those IP addresses off. Caused a little ripple at the high school because they were using them for research, but because we were constantly monitoring the system, we were able to say, this doesn't look good, either it's harmless or harmful. We needed to address it as well. So, E-rate covers basic infrastructure, but we're looking to have it cover cybersecurity protocols, a lot more detection options, not only on our devices, but on our network, but also on our devices as well.
I know one of the things is security groups and making sure that they're extremely defined and what can be allowed and what cannot be allowed. I think that that's very important. So for me, I truly believe that, within a district, implementing those device security groups or implementing your organizational units. So if one school is down or you partition your network, if you have one school that's out, it doesn't stop the daily operations of another school. And sometimes it's hard to do that if you don't have a redundancy plan in place, but those are some things that's definitely can be beneficial with your network security measures and helping to protect students' footprints as well as for staff.
Oh, absolutely. The redundancy plan is big. I also think that looking at more cloud-based storage is another important piece. When I got into the tech world, I would have network admins who would be hugging servers within the server room and not willing to let go of it. But if you're reliant on a server that suddenly is either compromised or it has something wrong with it, you need to be able to have that backup and redundancy. And school districts are very good about doing this. The other piece is also having data governance. Who has access to what, and why do they need access to certain things?
That's right. So. What are your thoughts on see something, say something? That is like, I stick to that motto because there will be emails that come out and sometimes when you're in the mix of working, you don't realize that it's a spam email. So what are your thoughts on the whole see something, say something when it comes to weird emails and phishing attempts, and how, because there is a level of ownership that students and staff can take to help with the implementation of those network security measures as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I go back to it again, it's all about education. Go through those phishing tests that, a lot of the, like Cisco has phishing tests, Fortinet, all those kind of big companies have phishing tests, and then educate your staff and students. And what I have learned is once they learn it, they can't unlearn it. So I would have, they would either forward me the emails, which is not what you're supposed to do, but in a lot of cases, yeah, I know. Or they would print it off and drop it in my office and say, well, what do you think about this? What I always caution against is when they decide to follow it down the rabbit hole just to see how far it goes. So again, and users are usually, I hate it, whether it's district level or at a student level, users are where is our biggest Achilles heel when it comes to data privacy and cybersecurity. And that's what these organizations feed on. So the more we can educate people, the more we can make it personal. And there's a lot of programs out there. Common Sense has them. Know Before has them. There's a lot out there that you got to train your staff. And hopefully that they're doing less and less of it. But if they do, having strong security systems in place can actually mitigate any issues. But the phishing is a huge problem for us as district CTOs.
And I also think that when districts are developing their technology plan, whether it's for internal purposes or not, just making sure that whatever their strategic timeline is, that they kind of stick to that, whether it's ongoing or it's in progress or it's been accomplished. It's great to have that because that helps for budgeting purposes. When you're talking about implementing network security measures, if you don't plan ahead and budget for that, then sometimes you can be in a situation where, for example, you may have bought a bulk of Chromebooks, and now they are without warranty, but you have Chromebooks that need repairs, and you don't want to not repair them because you want to make sure that they have the latest software updates and things of that nature. So just making sure that planning ahead for that, because budget is a very important part of those implementations for those security measures, of course.
Absolutely. Sustainability is key. And I keep saying I'm a little, a year out of the role, but I still feel like it's a collective we. We're running into that, I hate to call it the funding cliff. Like, we now have to move these from special funding or a CapEx funding to an OpEx. And some saw that earlier and have already started doing that, and others are working with their school boards and their superintendent and the business department to do that. I also, the cybersecurity insurance requirements have changed greatly too, and they're requiring that you have a lot of these things in place. So it not only is a want, it's an absolute need and required in order for you to get cybersecurity insurance. So the regulations are tightening, but it's going to be a battle, a struggle for some districts who bought all those Chromebooks and iPads, and you can't patch them, you can't update them, and that's coming. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in the next few years.
Yeah, I used to say, now that we have the technology, now what do we do with it? How do we sustain it? How do we keep it? And I can remember as a fresh technology director, my tenure of technology director started in 2018, and the district that I worked in, we were not a one-to-one. We ended up being a one-to-one by the end of that year. And then it was like the pandemic hit shortly after, and it was like, oh my gosh, now I have to send all of these computers home. And I was, like you said about those tech directors holding no service, I was holding on to it. I'm like, no, I don't want them to go home. But you want them to use the devices, of course. And I do think that for a security standpoint, the pandemic really taught us and tech leaders and classroom teachers how to be innovative in how you measure the student security. Because we couldn't keep them at the school. We had to do a lot of off-premise measuring. And it took a lot of dedication to make sure that students were still receiving equitable access to these resources. However, we were keeping them safe. So that was very important. So I always champion and kudos all of the tech directors, the classroom teachers, the students and parents that were able to go through that period of not knowing what it would look like, how long it would last, but was still able to maintain those resources and give students that access.
I absolutely agree. And, we as tech directors, we're just one person. It really takes a village to keep students safe. And like you said, that includes the parents and the students and teachers and administration. And but it's I think, again, it's just educating everybody and putting in really strong protocols. And once you educate them, they're okay with those safeguards. They know that you're not only keeping them safe, but you're keeping others safe, because it's not just about student data, it's about staff data and teacher data. And so once you make it personal, people are a little more aware of it. And really, I felt like they really came on board and were really champions for us to, as we continue to try and keep student data safe.
Yes. And, with the footprints and safeguarding it, being open, one thing that I always suggest is being open to understanding that you have to look at your safety and your security through a different set of lenses. You have to look at it through the teacher lens. You have to look at it through the student lens and as well as the administrator, because as an ITRT, I could not understand why whatever application I wanted, if it worked for education and students were going to benefit for it, why can't we have it? And then when I stepped into the role of technology director and I saw it from the security side, I was like, okay, so now I understand why I can't always have every access to every resource because it says that it's, SOL based or it's standard aligned, because there are some things that can happen in the background of those applications that can make or break your security measures when it comes to districts and what they're implementing. So it was a learning curve for me because I'm like, what, we can't have this, and it's like, no, we can't. I'm like, oh no. So being open to seeing it from different sets of lenses, what you need from the student perspective, as well as the teacher, and then your tech director and your school security team.
And it goes back to communication. Just make sure that when I started, my last district started doing an inventory of the apps and really seeing what we had out there and looking at more, district buying policies as opposed to classroom or building policies. And I spent a lot of time with the building principals and with my tech committee and my ITSs, so they all really understood what we were trying to do. And once they started to, it really was a much easier lift for me because we were all involved and we all understood it. It's almost like, be a principal for the day, lets everybody be a CTO for the day. Children screaming.
Right. We're going to move on to our last and final slide. All right, best practices. We talk about best practices all the time and how that looks different depending upon what you're actually referring to. But for today's purposes, what are some best practices that you feel can be used to bring an awareness to the importance of managing digital footprints and cybersecurity?
And I think we've talked about a lot of that. I think, education is important. I think safeguards are really important. I think having a plan, a redundancy plan, a contingency plan is really important. I think that also being very on top of what's going on with your network, where are the teachers and students going, what websites are they going to, why are they going to those websites? So it's not only education for them, it's education for us to understand it. And I think just having procedures in place that make sense to them. I mean, like you said, as a teacher or in the classroom, you didn't understand. Well, if you make it simple, easy for them to use, and it's efficient so that they get their answers when they need to, and that we're completely diligent on responding to any of their concerns or alerts.
Definitely. One of the best practices I think that I can recall having the experience of using is dealing with students who may have had social and emotional learning, or having students that were dealing with different situations, whether it was at home life and things of that nature. And we were able to track some online activities and provide students support that they needed during that time. So we had developed a team of guidance counselors, principals, school resource officers, because there were some moments where we saw some online history that we knew that we needed to champion and be there for that particular child. So having a defined set of who's responsible for what so that we don't drop the ball in those areas, because those are important times where students need us, was one of our best practices that we use. And we were able to kind of rally around those students and make sure that they had the support that they needed during that time, because you see so much of what, when you're managing digital footprints, and that comes down from, ensuring IP addresses and making sure that students are using appropriate websites, or you get reports and it says, hey, this child was on something that you've marked as inappropriate. We want to give you a flag, but keeping that data allows you to provide support if necessary, because that trail may lead to something at a later time that you want to make sure that you get in front of. So that is something that I felt like having the technology support for that was great.
Oh, absolutely. And, students, emotional and physical well-being are the top of our list with regard to this. And there are so many great programs that actually help CTOs and guidance departments and building principals and adjustment counselors to be able to identify when students are actually in an unsafe environment online. So it's encouraging when I see those kind of things.
It truly is. Looking a little bit more at bringing the awareness, and then we're going to get ready to wrap it up.
Okay.
But thinking about cybersecurity and how that is like one of those things that no matter what part of education you're in, you cannot get around it. What would you say is your number one tip? If you could give our listeners a way to bring an importance to cybersecurity, what would be your number one tip on how they can bring an awareness to the importance of school cybersecurity?
I think tabletop exercises. I think running through scenarios where a cybersecurity attack would happen and what it means to the district, what it means to your classroom. A lot of times they're done at a higher level, but I would recommend doing them at the lower level, bring everybody in and they could see, okay, so I brought my home laptop in, got it on the internet, and now we've shut down half the network because of it. And, why is that? Teaching them how to make sure that their software is updated, make sure they run those patches when we send them through. But again, awareness is key. And I keep saying education. It's honestly, that to me is the top one. Everybody needs to be educated, from the superintendent down to your preschool teacher, down to your parents. So that would be my top one, is education.
I definitely think educating students as early as your pre-K and kindergarten, all the way through your K-12 is important. Because as students start to get email addresses and they get those school issued accounts, and just knowing how to manage that, what does that look like? What are some things that you can search for and you can look into to know if this is an inappropriate email, or this didn't come from someone that it's supposed to come from, or, just knowing how they can kind of navigate those things, because we are educating the next group of leaders, the next CEOs, teachers, directors, and we want to make sure that we are providing that support. So I definitely think educating as early as possible on how that works. We used to, in my district, we used to use Medikits for kids, and
yes,
and they loved it. And it was, but it down to not giving out your social security number, not giving out your phone number, not giving out your, for granted that they may already know that, then, you could be in a situation where they've exposed themselves unbeknownst to themselves, so managing that is very important as well. So.
And, the digital literacy and computer science standards that are out there, that in Massachusetts is full into it, but a lot of states are doing the same thing. Is really important. That digital literacy at a really young age is really important, and talking about those particular topics that you were just talking about. So the more districts can implement the DLCS standards into their pre-K all the way to 12, that helps to safeguard students not only in school but at home, or wherever they are on their little phones.
And don't be afraid of the two-factor authenticator.
Oh my goodness, no. You know what? Every time it happens with me, I am like,
I don't want to do it.
and I'm like, you know what? But I'm keeping my data safe. So
that's right.
I take it positively. And a lot of districts are moving towards that. In a variety of interesting ways, because of there's a lot of ways you can do the two-step authentication and people aren't using their own devices. So moving to that. The other big thing is, which I say administrators hate the worst about it, but changing your password. And the higher access you have to the system, the more often you need to have your password changed. So forcing those password changes. I can't tell you the number of baskets I would walk into a teacher's classroom and they'd have
their password,
little Post-it notes, and having that single sign-on option. So they only have to have one password that accesses everything, but definitely changing passwords often. Absolutely.
When I started as a classroom teacher over 15 years ago, my password was one of those that it was like 7 characters and you're good. And now it's like, oh my gosh, if I had to remember all of this, I don't know what I would do. So, and things have changed, there's so many different suggestions on what a secure password is and what's not a secure password. So I definitely, as you mentioned with passwords, just making sure that whatever your organization has deemed as their appropriate policy for it to follow that, because they have those security measures in place for a reason.
And the latest one I heard is that phrases are good.
I've heard that as well.
But my Amazon account, I don't know how many times I get emails and texts about my Amazon account, like my payment didn't go through, or you need to reset your password. And thank goodness for the two-step authentication, the multi-authentication that I'm able to do it. You should never click on a link. You should always go to the website. Always. So, but as adults, we don't always do what we're supposed to do.
Right. We're going to move on to our last slide.
Okay.
We have a couple of listeners on the call. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. And we'll give a few moments for that. Eileen, it has been so great talking to you. I mean, just, the CTO, you just give me all of the tech vibes. I love it. And I'm so excited that you were able to join us. And of course, in your new role, because you're continuing to bridge the gap in education and provide support as district leaders need that, as well as classroom teachers, and it all trickles down to students. So that's, it's just a holistic view of things, but it doesn't look like we have any questions, but I would like to thank all of those that have attended with us today. So there you have it, episode 6 of Navigating the New Normal, Safeguarding Digital Footprints. My name is Krystle Pearson. I am your host. We have Eileen here, who will be back, right? You're coming back to see us sometime soon? Absolutely. And if you're heading to ISTE in Philadelphia this year, then Eileen, as well as myself, will be there. If you happen to see us there, give us a wave, give us a shout out, and we would love to connect. So thank you so much for joining us, and we're out.
Thank you.